By Terry, is there support?
Support.
Support by Tim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next item is review minutes from September 19th, 2018. Changes or updates, or otherwise I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Elena,
Support.
support by Steve. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Man, we'll be done shortly. No. General public comment. This provision is made to encourage the expression of questions and concerns regarding non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. If you would like to address the Planning Commission on something that is not on the agenda this evening, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, we will move on. Case number 17-759, Weller Auto, Inc., Special Exception Use Permit and Site Plan Review. Public hearing tabled from 12/6/2017. Applicant Skip Weller of Weller Auto, Inc. has applied on behalf of lot owner Baker Property, LLC for a special exception use permit and site plan review request to allow a junkyard/automotive parts recycling facility, vehicle processing facility, and automotive sales on approximately 22.9 acres of property, including portions of the Alpine Avenue right-of-way. Proposed improvements include a 7,200 square foot vehicle processing building, a parking area, site resurfacing, landscaping, and fencing. The request will include a stormwater variance request for relief from Walker stormwater ordinance requirements, including minimum required detention and maximum permitted outflow.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to excuse myself on this one.
Okay, Jason? Dan? Do we need a motion to remove it from the table?
Yes, please do.
Can I get a motion to remove it from the table?
Make the motion.
Motion by Steve, is there support? Support by Elaine. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Dan?
Okay, thanks. Tyler, it seems like it's been a little while since we've talked about this case, and it's been pushing the year limit before you kind of look at a new project as a new project, but there's been a lot of background work being done, mostly regarding environmental review of this site that the project relates to, so we'll try to get everybody up to speed, give a little bit of background, and talk through some of the 4 key focus areas that we talked about last year as being problematic for the project at that time, where we've been since then on those focus areas, and potentially a direction forward. So, don't know how many of you, if I could get a show of hands, how many of you live near or have interest in this Weller proposal? So I see a couple on my right, and a good handful of you on my left side of the room, so that's good. It'll be a good opportunity to get you folks through this review and to hear more about this project, and then we'll get on to some of our maybe lighter discussion items on the agenda. This is a pretty complicated site. It's a lot of property, so there's been a lot of interest in this and what's going to happen on this site. So I want to first retrace our steps and talk about what's been proposed and what's the review process that brought us here. The proposal is for a variety of uses on this 20 some odd acre, actually a little under 20 acre site right near the southern edge of the city of Walker on Alpine Avenue. What we're looking at, if you box the terms of these land uses into what we define in our zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance calls this automotive repair major, so overnight type repairs to automobiles, junkyard, which is, for lack of a better word, automotive recycling, automotive sales, and part processing or light manufacturing. So there's a variety of kind of commercial and industrial uses on the site. This is what the site layout generally looks like. This is the just a broad view of one of the plan that's been shared with the planning commissioners. So obviously a lot of space out there for vehicle storage and buffer area to separate this site from the properties to the north on Rogers Street. So back when we reviewed this last, a little bit of cutoff information at the top of this slide, there's a bullet that says ZBA review or variance review. So those first 4 bullet points are places in our zoning ordinance that this project stretches beyond what the code allows. So there were a few variance requests that were granted by our zoning board of appeals related to buffer from the adjacent residential properties, the layout of the parking aisles needing to be 20 feet spaced apart. The applicants kind of jumped through those hoops of review as they also obtained a rezoning to allow for these uses, which are really heavy industrial and outdoor commercial in nature, whereas there was a lot of residential zoning on that site before. Once the rezoning was obtained, we looked at this last December, and the key issues that came up at that time were what happened with this site in terms of environmental history? What does the MDEQ and the county health department have to say, and how do they weigh into the process in terms of what environmental impacts may have been on the site before? That was kind of a lingering uncertainty. There had been a due care plan proposed in terms of how the applicants were gonna propose to take care of the site at that time, but there hadn't been a lot of review and kind of data cleansing. And so that's one thing that's been done at a pretty significant level over the last 10 months, has been the production of what's called a response activity plan, which shows how the applicants propose to basically ensure that there's no increase in environmental impacts and that the existing impacts are contained. The second point was drainage and utility provisions, and basically that means stormwater in this site, and things like sanitary, sewer, and water service also relate to that, but stormwater was the big issue on this point. How is the stormwater drainage, detention, treatment being handled on the site? There was some detail that had to be worked through. The right-of-way design in terms of what is left in the right-of-way on Alpine Avenue, that's a kind of a stretch of land that is maintained and operated by the city, and so anything that's in that strip could cause problems for the city's ability to maintain, keep the roads clear, and keep that a safe traffic corridor. So we had to look at some items that were proposed to be in that right-of-way, and those have been largely addressed, and what I call site aesthetics and buffering. So that relates to kind of the operational impacts of the site. What does it look and feel and sound like? I think there was a lot of discussion about how this will be a pretty low impact site in terms of noise for the most part compared to industrial sites, but one of the things we wanted to look at is more detail regarding the screening, the visual screening of what happens there, and kind of the architectural treatment of the site. So that brings us to the overall picture of what the site looks like now. I think this is a 2017 aerial photo, so this is after the Baker property moved their vehicles off the site, and it looks in its current vacant state. This is what it looks like from the street, except that the Baker sign has been more or less forcefully removed. There was a collision with the sign, and then the applicants removed that sign, and they're proposing a new sign that's going to be in compliance with where it needs to be for zoning. But that's kind of a rough site orientation. Some of the new submittals and plan changes, I'm just going to show two images here that kind of sum everything up, or two slides. One is that many of the items that had previously been proposed in the right-of-way have been removed, and now you see sort of a cross-section that this is my best shot at showing what's proposed. You now see more of a widened parkway next to Alpine Avenue, more space for snow storage, more of a separation for people walking by the site, and then more of a functional parking lot and circulation inside the site. And the sign, of course, is being removed and relocated inside the site as well. So a lot of improvements in the right-of-way. Still a couple of items to address on that front, but that I'll talk about. The other new submittal, and this is just one sheet of many hundreds, I think. This is the notice of basically a conditional approval letter of the response activity plan by the Michigan DEQ. And what goes with this is a whole lot of data and some conditions imposed on that, but this basically says that the response activity plan has been reviewed and accepted by the DEQ. So jumping back into the four focus areas that we had last time, I'm gonna skip that slide. This actually shows 5, but I'm gonna focus on 4. One is the environmental impacts, one is the right-of-way design, drainage and utilities, site aesthetics and buffering, and those all kind of feed into how you look at the special use aspects of this site. You have a couple of uses on this site that are considered high-intensity uses: automobile storage and recycling, which is also called the junkyard, and automobile sales. Those are more intensive uses that warrant a special level of review by the Planning Commission to make sure that they fit with the neighboring properties. And so I think when you determine what fits with the neighboring properties, you have to use the criteria that the zoning ordinance asked for you to use in the zoning ordinance, but you can plug in these site-specific issues that feed into how you answer those questions. So that's where these criteria kind of flesh out based on this site. So those factors that feed into the review, jumping into those, getting into the environmental aspects. We do have data on well and water service from surrounding properties. The overall gradient of this site appears to be kind of not impacting adjacent sites on Rogers Street, which are basically connected to public water. On Panel Street to the south, you have other industrial properties kind of down gradient. And we do have some well and water data that we can sort through at staff level. So there's an additional comment on here, but that aspect is being reviewed and addressed. And then otherwise, anything that's plugged into that response activity plan from the DEQ, we should just make sure that that's being addressed on the plan submittals. In terms of the right-of-way design, there's a lot that's been taken care of here. One thing that we have to address is making sure that the sidewalk that they propose still meets accessible design standards. They had to do some creative things to lay it out and to make it work with the site. And so you have to make sure that you avoid things like sharp curves and sharp drops in grade. So just some detail on those notes. There are some additional recommendations from the city engineer that I'll wait, and I won't weigh in on those yet in terms of cleaning up some of the other right-of-way issues. One of the ideas that we have is to vacate an additional 10 feet of right-of-way as a way to make sure that there's no conflict between what's on the private side and what the city has to maintain. In terms of drainage and utilities, there is a stormwater variance request that's out there. There is a lot of stormwater data that's been provided and coordinated with staff. So you still have to go through the stormwater variance review process in terms of what's being requested here. You have detention, outflow, and pipe size variance requests based on them needing relief from those requirements for the overall site. That's what they're asking for, and I will ask you to talk through those things. And then if there's any grading that needs to be done on the railroad property, that should be secured by an agreement with the railroad. It'd be probably best to avoid that. And additionally, if there's any wetland permits needed, those should be obtained from the MDEQ. It looks like the wetlands that are being called out here are unregulated, but I'll let the applicant speak to what their needs are regarding those pockets of water. Then my last three last slides here. One is talking about some of the aesthetic issues. Make sure that your screening is set. So wherever there might be a line of sight from some of the adjacent Panel Street properties, make sure that you're screening the view into the site to a 6-foot height. In some cases, the railroad bed is going to take care of that. I would credit that as being part of the screen. But in some cases, farther up Panel, you want to make sure you still have a block line of sight into the automotive storage area. One of the other issues is whether the proposed dumpster and fluid storage building should remain kind of up near the front of the site. I think from a kind of visual aesthetic standpoint of this plan, those should be moved behind the rear plane of the building that's proposed. The applicant has expressed the desire for more of the functional aspect, that they want to be able to maneuver vehicles in that area, and they want to leave it where it is. There's no hard and fast rule regarding smaller structures like this in the zoning ordinance. I just think from a aspect of making this a site that blends with the surrounding properties and is a approachable site from the pedestrian standpoint, you want to have stuff like that kind of tucked away and out of sight. I also have a couple comments about your authority as the planning commission to regulate where vehicles are sold and displayed for sale. We haven't had a car sales lot since I've been here with Walker, but there is the authority of the planning commission to kind of express some limits or conditions on the automotive sales and display area. I think what they propose at the end of the day is reasonable. So they show a pretty small contained area where they will display and sell vehicles from, and I think that's a reasonable area to stick to. Whether there's any need for architectural treatment on the new building they propose in the back of the site, That's another thing you can look at. Maybe what you can see from the right-of-way should have some color treatment along the top, just so that it's not just kind of a generic, kind of bland, industrial-style building that you see from Alpine. Finally, one of the things we'll have to work through is the allocation of the land in the buffer area. There are a couple of ways that may be handled from a land division standpoint. And so that's a thing that we'll have to work through as we lock in kind of the final configuration of this property. And last thing on this slide is the fencing. I'm asking for a key to show where different types of fencing are proposed on the site. There's a lot of information there. I'm glad to go back through the slides, but that hits on all my marks of what I'm still looking for in the plans. One of the biggest life safety issues and public health issues that we looked at in the last year was making sure that this was being vetted through a Michigan DEQ process. And it's a team effort. We certainly look at aspects of the environmental part of the site, but we certainly relied on the DEQ pretty heavily for some of the scientific analysis of what the impacts are there. And now that that process has been done, we feel more comfortable with that aspect of it. Everything else is details in terms of zoning that I think I can work through with the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any initial questions for Dan? Scott?
The report you have from engineering is much, much shorter than what you had last time, which is obviously a good thing. We've probably had a dozen meetings of varying intensity since the last public discussion, so a lot of things have been worked out. Right off the top, when you talk about stormwater, there is a mislabeled contour elevation in there. I figured Tom would catch it. I know it kind of stood out at me and thought I'd better mention it, or he'll poke me and say, why didn't you catch that? But when the applicant goes through their stormwater design, they can kind of clean that up. The second note is also related to storm sewer, and that's with the pre-treatment tanks. And one of the challenges for these folks is that with the new parking lot out front, it's hard to push the water backwards and get the kind of treatment that they can get from their detention area. So they've proposed to do just first flush in that area that's already along Alpine Avenue, and they're gonna do that with a couple of pre-treatment structures. They're like big tanks. They're gonna have, it's gonna cycle the water up and down through different pipes and baffles, and they'll be able to clean that on a regular basis, and it'll pull out a lot of the stuff that we're looking to clean from a parking lot in a salvage yard like this. So we think that's good. I think the big issue there is that they are proposing to put that between the 50 and 60 feet from center line mark. And if you remember back to the very first time we talked about this, we have 60 feet of right of way from the center line here, which is great. That's more than we usually have other places. Early on, there was a debate where the developer had said, I challenged that, and I think you have 33. And we debated a little bit, and we basically said, we're not gonna back down. This is what we have, it's 60. However, we don't need all 60, and we'd be glad to consider vacating 10 feet of it, because 50 is probably the right number. We didn't go down that route at first, but we've worked our way over a period of months and years to that point where we're comfortable saying we would recommend after this to the city commission that they vacate that west 10 feet so that their stuff would be then on their property instead of in the public right of way. It might seem like a little thing, but when a telecommunication company comes in, like AT&T or somebody or ABC Fiber, they have the rights to do just about anything they want in our right of way because it's telecommunications. And they'll come up to a structure like that and drill holes right through it and keep going because they're allowed to. It's in the right of way. So it's really, really important for us to make sure that's not in the right of way. And I think that's probably the best way to handle that. So we'll certainly be looking for some input there, but I think ultimately that decision comes from the city commission at a next step. If it can't be vacated, then we would ask that they adjust their stormwater design to move that back out of that 60 feet. I know the DPW felt very strongly about that, so I want to back them up on that. Driveway modifications, there's quite a few along this frontage. It's impossible for all the new driveways and the modified driveways to meet our ordinance, but we need to do everything we can to maximize how close we get. And so I put a note in here about the discretion of the DPW director. We don't just want to have straight lines from the driveways out to the street where there's no taper, and so people have to slow down to like 5 miles an hour to get in a tight driveway. We want to make sure that they all have reasonable tapers given the area and the space that's available. Dan mentioned the DEQ signing off. You know, that has been a really, really big part of this. And what we've done is essentially We've put our trust in the DEQ, and we've had 3 or 4 different members of that organization at meetings with us to represent their different disciplines among the DEQ. And so it's allowed us to not have to hire an environmental consultant to get into the details here that you would normally have at a site like this. So we're comfortable with the DEQ sign-off that they've provided. Number 5 talks about the non-regulated areas. I think that is to imply wetland areas. And we've talked a little bit about that in the past, but on the southwest part of the site there, where there's some puddles, those areas are proposed to be regraded slightly. In my mind, I'm kind of thinking almost like scarified, where it's just scraped up a little bit. And then you've got the millings that are gonna go in on that area, plus the remainder of the yard part of the site. That's a good thing, because those millings or any crushed material like that can hold a lot of water, and it can help to push a lot of that water back into the ground. We talked about that before, that the DEQ may or may not wanna have something like that. In this case, they were comfortable with it, and it's been part of the stormwater design for the last few months that they have agreed to. There are a lot of documents that have been submitted that are not part of this package, and I think it's important for us to point out that everything that's been submitted should be considered part of this approved package if this moves forward, because it's all vitally important. And we can't overwhelm you with 300 pages of material, because it's just not fair. You couldn't get through it all, but you've already got plenty of material. But assume that all of the environmental documents, all the soil borings, all the well samples, all of that stuff should be part of this case if there's ever a problem, and certainly that will be kept on record here. And then the last item is if there's anything at all here that impacts the railroad, any kind of grading, increases in drainage, anything like that, we should be careful that our approval is not an approval of the railroad. They still need to be good neighbors in that respect, and if there's anything that has to happen along those property lines, they still need to get those approvals on their own. And that's it for engineering.
Okay, thanks. Scott, any initial questions for Scott?
Just clarification, and I think you maybe have said it already even tonight, but with regard to the water sources for the people along Roger and along Panel, sounds like Roger, without exception, are public water, is that correct?
I wouldn't say without exception. I believe there's water there. I think we had kind of been looking more towards the south, because that's the general direction of groundwater flow. And we were more worried about the areas south of Panel where there's not water.
Yeah.
And we did talk about what it would take to bring that in there, and there is just not enough horsepower to get that done for a handful of homes. We'd be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And I think with the DEQ looking at this and being more comfortable with their findings, we're less concerned about migration of anything that might be out there.
And even to Panel, where there was recognition that there are some wells there, it sounded like what would come off the site would not make the situation even any worse than it is right now,
I
correct?
think that was the key for Dan and I, and we learned a lot throughout this process, that, we can't make this developer and this applicant go back on anything that's been done in the past.
Yeah.
So, we're not letting anybody off the hook for things that have been put in the ground a long time ago, but the design that they have proposed is not gonna make any of that worse. In most cases, I think it's gonna make it better, mitigate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Scott, up in the north end here, looks like 50 feet, but then we get down to the south end, and I see the sidewalk goes further away, and so will there be an encroachment in the 50 with the parking lot?
With cars that might be parked out there, yes. We have not typically required, we've not considered those an encroachment by definition, I guess, in the past. We've got a few places around the city where parking lots inch into the right-of-way. As long as there's not a sign or a fence or some kind of an obstruction, we really haven't made too big a deal of those kinds of things. So we're kind of trying to be fair about simply parking cars. And that would be in the area that's existing parking lot. So what they've done in that area is they've squeezed that area a little bit. They've moved the sidewalk away. I think there's 5 or 6 feet of parkway, which isn't what we'd like to have ideally, but it's way better than having 0 feet of parkway, which is what we have today. And then that allows them to make sure that the sidewalk has proper ADA ramps up and down at each driveway. Not a true ADA ramp, but ADA compliant.
Right.
Because if it's right up against the road, every time that you go down to a driveway, you've got a very steep up and down, and this will help mitigate that.
My other observation, it looks like there's too many driveways there. With that left turn there for Ann Street, these driveways aren't gonna function very well.
I think that's certainly something that you can debate. We had a lot of talk about that on the staff end, and, you know, we're always trying to get rid of driveways and consolidate.
But in your notes, you said you were leaving it to the DPW director.
On the
For
radiuses,
for configuration.
Okay.
For the ones that have to be modified, we want to make sure that they have some kind of a taper.
But in here, you're not proposing to get rid of the driveways.
Well, they're the ones proposing the plan. We negotiated quite a bit, we talked quite a bit about trying to eliminate some of those. I think what you have in front of you is their proposal for how many driveways they'd like to keep. You can absolutely discuss that, and Tom's right, this is a lot of driveways for this kind of property. I think they have to justify that to you in terms of how the vehicles flow, how their pattern of access works. That's up to them.
There have been a reduction from 8 to 5, so 5 is still a lot. Reduction has occurred on the northern end of the site where they're developing it. Driveways, I think.
I guess to piggyback on Tom's comments, the location, not only the number, but the location, and especially the one that's furthest to the south, its relative alignment with the Ann Street intersection would be at least one in particular that I think would warrant some conversation.
Okay, other questions for Scott? Otherwise, ask the applicant to approach the podium, state your name for the record. I will say, we've been through this a lot, and congratulations on what you've done.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank you for your
long,
time tonight.
long ways from where it was.
A lot of questions that you'll have, I'm sure, that the engineering, we brought Bob Goodhart with us has drawn up.
Is there anything you want to add to what they've said initially, or you open to questions? or-
Except that we drew one of the driveways, I think, to the north with what Mr. Conder said, with the curve, the curvature, instead of a square, I think, that's on one of those drawings. And we closed 3 of the 8 drives. You know, it's,
As far as the dumpsters out front or
proposed alongside.
alongside, not out front, we generally don't allow that. What's the reasoning behind that?
Okay, Chris Weller, and I'm Skip's partner, and the dumpsters, if we go back, are behind the screened-in fence. There's an existing fence there that 8 foot tall, and there's a container that our fluids needed to be in, and the dumpster needs to be, again, it's behind the fence. It's an enclosed area with screening. You won't see either one when you go by. As part of our process, we're going to be bringing our cars that come in that gate, dropping them, and then we empty the cars out and take out the fluids. So for safety, that's for the trash truck to, the flow is just the best place for us. But again, you don't see it driving by,
Okay, so they will be behind a fence.
for sure. Yep, and the fence will be, the fence is 8.5?
no, the fence is 8.
Yeah.
The fence is 8.5.
Very good. He was asking on the dumpsters, so, yeah, the dumpster will be a standard size 5 foot tall box, and it'll be behind the existing screen fence, and then we're gonna put, quite a bit of landscaping in front of the existing fence. Go ahead.
Bob Goodhart, Pathfinder Engineering. I did a sketch, and I don't know if we can get that up on the board. I have other copies here, but that's a line of sight for, that's the fluid storage building and the dumpster. So you can see the 8 foot high fence that's there, and that's looking at it from northbound with your height of eye in a vehicle over that, and it shows that you can see just the top of the building way on the left side of the drawing, but you cannot see the fluid storage building or the dumpster behind that fence with your line of sight. And I guess, if you're walking on the sidewalk, you still can't because you're closer also. So that's part of the reason to not obstruct the area that they need to process, but also that it's going to be screened and you can't see it from the road either, so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions from the planning commission?
I have just since we're talking about these drives, can you explain why you need those that are located where they're at and the use and so many, et cetera?
The north drive, it lines up with the gate, and that's where the cars come in one at a time normally. And instead of gagging up the other gate with a big 45-foot tractor trailer coming in, taking out the remaining with the tractor trailer. So that's the other drive. The other two drives to the north are for customers in and out. And I believe the only other drive is next to the existing sign that's going to be coming out. So there's still overhead doors, there still will be customer access for the garage part of the site. I'm just in fear that if we shut off that, one of them two drives, it's really going to mess things up. I don't believe it's going to affect the light and the flow of the traffic. It's been there, it's not going to be high traffic, it'd be more employee parking and for cars coming in on a single wrecker. They're going to be dropped off in that gate, they go out the other gate.
If you would
Yes.
please indicate which gate you're talking about.
Yeah, if you just point to the map from where
That
you
might
are,
be
Chris,
easier,
that'll-
okay.
everybody will see.
Yeah, there's, the blue areas are the five, so this one here is customers in or out. It's a two-way parking. This is customers in and out. There's gonna be a lot of customers down on this app. This gate, this opening here is existing, and it lines up with the main gate that comes in. And again, we'll have a lot of, not a lot, but a couple, maybe 3 or 4 a week, tractor trailers that come in and pick up the remaining body of, the processed bodies of a car. So that really needs to stay and be lined up there. So we're down to these two here. This one lines up with that gate, and that gate we need to stay. So it's not a high traffic gate, but otherwise I'm gonna be bringing.
Gate for what?
This is the gate to bring cars in. It's an existing gate that's there. I could show you on another drawing.
No, I know where it is,
Okay.
but
There's a gate there.
that is so close to that traffic light, and I've driven by there since 1979 when Baker was in business.
I see.
In those driveways down there, it was, you never knew who was going in, where, out, what. It was very confusing.
I see. Okay.
But you're saying that lines up with a gate for the processing of the vehicles coming in?
Yeah, that was, otherwise, my fear is we're gonna be taking who's ever parked here to come in that gate, we're just gonna be, instead of a
Why,
straight shot.
why can't they go through the third driveway up?
This one here?
Why can't you take all your inbound, outbound trucks and all that through that gate?
Cars come in this way and they come out this way is the reason, how it flows, how to line up the cars along this fence to be processed, is the
Well,
reason. that-
why can't you come in and come around behind the building and line them up?
Okay.
I don't know how you're gonna make a left-hand turn into that driveway, that close to that traffic signal with that left turn lane there. City's got it one lane down, they got the 3-lane section to the south, and when they get to the gate, it's both lanes hell-bent for north.
Okay. Okay. Well, if it would appease this board, I guess I would offer to close that one opening off. It is a lot of frontage. It's easier to close
I think you need to close those two south ones, really.
these two here.
Yep,
I wouldn't make them do both of them.
they got 3 driveways. Nobody else has 3 driveways.
They got
up
a
and
lot
down
of
the
frontage
street.
here.
That's why the driveway to the north is gonna be very critical to them. These two to the south aren't gonna work. I've watched Baker do it and it doesn't work.
The second one from the south, what is that one used for?
This one here?
Yes.
Well, if I need to get rid of one of these two, I would, it would be, I got employee parking down here, and to bring cars in out of, to come in and drop them off here.
There's 5 parking spaces apart. That's
Okay.
5 times 8, that's 40 feet. Those driveways are too close. 40 foot apart, come on.
Well, how often do you see people coming in and out of these
That's
different curb
supposed to
cuts?
be employee parking. though.
Also, this is a self-serve auto parts. I have customers in this big parking lot that are walking in all day long with wheelbarrows, and now I got heavy truck traffic coming in and out, or wreckers coming in and out. It's a real liability issue.
Then you better have a pedestrian gate to let them in and out, so they'll separate them from the truck traffic.
We do, but it's just,
To step in here, they're going from 8 to 5. If they were willing to close that southernmost one, I see that as a good compromise. We're not gonna whip this whole site into absolute what we want it, and I think they're doing a good compromise, especially if he's willing to.
5? Come on, Tyler. They're 40 foot apart.
But we'd
Nobody
be
else
down
up
to
in the
4.
driveway's got 40 foot apart.
We'd be down to 4 then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just following what you're commenting on, yeah. And that gets you further away from.
Gets you a little bit away from Ann. So, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
The planning commission can do as they please. Other questions?
With regard to the parking along the frontage, appreciate the changes that have taken place on the overall plan. This is quite an improvement over what we saw back in December. But and a lot of immovable objects are now out of the public right-of-way. But to have the parking spaces that you have, I think there's a number, as many as 26 along that frontage there. The bumper blocks for the parking spaces are gonna be up against the new alignment for the sidewalk. And from my observation, if you get any type of, other than a small sedan parked along through there, as people are going in and out of those driveways, a large vehicle, whether it's a truck backed in or nose out, is a vision obstruction that we maybe have an opportunity to minimize by, at the very least, reducing the number of parking spaces that are up against that sidewalk on the south end of the site.
maybe this building here has service doors and for customers. So if you're going to be working on customer cars in this garage, if this is employees down here, I have nowhere to go with customer cars. Now, that's what Baker has always done in the past, and I don't believe it interfere with anybody with the parking blocks. We've been out there numerous times with any view or any safety issues of pedestrians. I would hope to leave them spots there.
Well, and they're moving everything back to the sidewalk.
Right, yeah, Bob Goodhart, the existing parking spaces go further east than what we are doing now because we have to move the sidewalk back for ADA standards. So we're making the existing parking lot narrower, but it still meets the new requirements of 18-foot spaces.
I can appreciate that, but I think the way it's laid out, you're gonna have 5 to 6 feet of the parking spots next to the sidewalk are still gonna be in that 50, if it's reduced down to a 50-foot right-of-way, at least you're gonna have 5 to 6 feet are still in that 50-foot right-of-way area. And generally, as your good rule of thumb, as you're using driveways in and out, you try to minimize the vision obstructions in the immediate area of where that driveway comes out into the public street.
That was all things that we've been working on since January with staff, so.
So from the far side of the sidewalk to where you enter the street, how far is that? The boulevard,
It's like 8.3 feet is one of the measurements they have on here for the new parkway. Definitely better than zero.
Yeah,
but not ideal.
that'll handle a vehicle. So I,
It's another reason to close those two driveways, because of vision obstructions for people driving in and out of the driveway. That, their primary driveway should be the north one. You got a lot of opening, you got a lot of circulation, they got employees to the south, got one main truck entrance. Those two driveways to the south, they're too much. Good reason to close them.
other comments or questions? Dan, what are we missing that we need to address better?
I think you've answered the unanswered questions. I think my report has some straightforward conditions that I'd like to see addressed. One of the other unanswered questions was architectural treatment of the proposed new building, which will be largely screened from view. If that's something you'd like to discuss. I was looking for a color differentiation on the top of the building from what you can see on Alpine Street. This, I think, is what they're saying is the east wall.
That is yeah, if I may, this is along Alpine with the sign that's coming down. This is the fence that's there that we're planning on landscaping. And then this is behind that fence, and here's the height of the fence. So this would be the south wall, 8-foot fence, 8.5-foot shipping container. It's a shipping container that the fluids are stored in.
Yeah, and actually, show me an image of the
Well, Dan, you're talking the aesthetics of the building, right?
aesthetics of the building, that's right. So here's the new.
Yeah, what are your plans for the building?
Well, the building is, the new building out back is for vehicle processing. It's back here, if you could see it on your screen. And this is one that we just put up on Chicago Drive a couple years ago. It's about the same size building. The one we're proposing has another, a little bit larger. But it's, we have a lot of vehicle movement around the building. And so we would like to pour a wall. It's an industrial area. It's behind, it'll be a nice looking building, but it's probably 300 feet back from the other building, which has got a lot of brickwork. I don't believe you're gonna see much of this building, maybe the top 4 or 5 feet, because of the angle of the 8-foot fence and your elevation. So this is a industrial building with siding, and it's an open air building. It's open on this end. This side would be more like this side, a couple overhead doors here. But we feel with how far back it is, we'll pick an earth tone color. We want this all to tie in nice. I've done a lot of projects. It will be a nice project when I'm done. My daughter's a designer. She'll pick out some good colors that tie in nice. I don't have colors that'll either be white, otherwise I might do the earth tones and tie it all together. But anyhow, I don't know. I didn't mean to get off there.
Bob, in your section that Bob drew, when you were looking at the fence and all that stuff, when you were looking at the containers and the dumpster, he talked about this building further back, didn't he? That was part of that sketch, correct? Because I think you had said you'll see the top 4 or 5 feet.
No, that's the building up front, I thought. Is that the building all the way back, Bob?
This section that you drew when you were talking about the oil and the dumpster, there's a larger building in the back. Is that the one we're talking about now?
That building right there is yes,
Okay.
that's the same thing.
Yep.
So that's just showing that you only see from the road the top
The top
5
portion.
feet of it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, here's a little drawing up in the right corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to get a context of behind the fence and pedestrian height, car height, whatever we're gonna see.
Okay, other questions or comments?
Just a question for Scott, with regard to the stormwater management variance. It would appear that in the DEQ analysis, they can't dig down very much.
Right.
And so it looks like what they propose for stormwater management, they're in the sweet spot as far as meeting the DEQ requirements, but it just falls short of what we'd otherwise require.
Yeah, they just couldn't come up with the volume with that shallow of an area, but I think with the idea that they're gonna turn this entire surface then will be crushed stones or millings. And so it's gonna absorb a lot of water on its own where you don't have to transport it. And then I think they had some pretty good sand that they discovered on the north end. So on the north end, they're kind of planning to put most of that in the ground. They had numbers that were higher than we'll even allow for design values. That was really good. So you add all that in together, and I think you described it very well. They kind of hit the sweet spot of providing enough detention to help take the edge off, but not so much to exacerbate any kind of contamination. They're making the situation a little bit better, but they can't come up with enough for the 100-year, storm. There's a little bit of a question about how much would really be generated when you've got all of these millings out on the site, though. It's not like they're throwing these millings over like a hard gravel or something. They're throwing it over a softer, scarified kind of a soil with a lot of sand in it. So we expect a lot of that water will never move. Just go straight down.
Other questions? Otherwise, we can open up the public hearing. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
Make a motion?
Motion by Steve, is there support? Support by Elaine, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is open. If you would like to address this case, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Elena, is there support?
Support.
Support by Terry, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed. I know this has been a long road, and I know it's been rough, and the DEQ, we met in that room with all those different agencies. I thought none of us were gonna get out of there alive, get so many agencies in one room, but thank you for your patience, and I know it's been rough, so.
That's all we know how to do is,
Junk cars.
I wish we knew how to have horse stables or something.
Okay, thank you. Planning Commission? Comments, questions?
Well, I would echo that comment. You've come a long ways, and it's a pretty good solution. I think a lot of things have gone well here, but I'm still against the two south driveways. We're gonna live with this for the next 70 years, so, and traffic is not gonna drop.
We take pride in our properties, so look at any of our properties.
Well, I'm not concerned about the look. I'm concerned about those two driveways aren't gonna function. You can't make a left-hand turn in them if there's any traffic at all, so
Some of that will alleviate itself as people,
that won't alleviate. You got too many driveways, Tyler. There's, just like when Baker was there. You didn't know where to turn in, you didn't know.
no, that's true.
So if you focus your people to the north driveway, your customers, I
But
think.
Tom, we're cutting the driveways in half.
That doesn't matter, Tyler.
Anyway. Other comments?
4 is still too many.
Otherwise, I'll entertain numerous motions.
So
A motion to approve the plan minus 2 driveways.
I mean,
Was that a serious motion?
yeah, I wish that was all it was.
Although I do encourage you to come to consensus on what you want to see for the driveways with.
Right, and that's what I was about to say, is I think that for myself, if we can get rid of that closest to Ann Street driveway, I would probably be all right with making
The
the
next
motion.
one's only 40 foot away. so
I know.
It's not, that one isn't gonna function either, just like it didn't in the Baker days.
I'm good with just the south one gone.
Terry? Believe me, I'd rather close them both too, but there's gotta be compromise. That's where I'm at.
Tyler, you gotta do it right too. I mean, this is a major intersection. We wouldn't let anybody else pop 2 driveways that close to that intersection. They have plenty of frontage for other driveways. They can put another driveway up at the north end of the yellow if they wanted 2 driveways up there,
I'm in
but not
agreement
at that intersection.
I'm in agreement with Tom's position.
Mark?
I'm okay with it. We can go.
The one?
Close the one for sure.
Close the one? Elena?
One.
Okay.
All right, well, I suppose I will make a motion according to that. And that would be added to the site plan, correct?
Yeah, so this is kind of a multi-part review in one. So you have special use permit, which is applied to a couple of the uses on the site. So for the the car sales and for the junkyard. You have a site plan that overarches everything. I think the prudent thing to do is go through the motions for both of those aspects of the site as well as the stormwater variance. So
Right.
it is a 4-part motion, but
Right. But as far as the driveway component, that would be added to the site plan.
site plan, yeah, I think that's a spatial.
And everything else should be laid out according to what we want to approve, right?
Yeah, findings of fact for the special use permit, that's all written into the motion. Yep.
Perfect. All right, so I will make motion for case 17-759 to approve the site plan set revision dated 9/20/2018 and supporting application materials for the proposed improvements in the roughly 23 acres of the reference properties located at 1973 through 2091 Alpine Avenue Northwest. Conditions of site plan approval, the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the staff planner's letter dated 9/26/2018. And the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 9/25/2018. Additionally, we would require that they close the southerlymost driveway on the site plan.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Tim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye. Not that I'm against the project, but
Okay. That
Okay.
passed.
Yep. So for case 17-759, I will make a motion to approve the requested special exception use permit based on the site plan set revision dated 9/20/2018 and supporting application material for the proposed improvements in the Weller Auto Project site specific to the junkyard use. Conditions, the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the staff planner's letter dated 9/26/2018. Findings of fact for section 94-250 of the Walker zoning ordinance. The use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public. The use will change the essential character of the surrounding area.
Steve and I apologize that
Not,
you will
right?
not if you're.
I was gonna say, it seemed like, yeah. The use will not harm the use or enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity. The use will not substantially diminish or impair property values within the area. The use will not result in any significant adverse impact on the natural environment. The use will not impede the orderly development and improvement of surrounding property. Adequate utilities, road, and drainage will be provided. The use will adhere to applicable local, state, and federal laws. And that is that one.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Elena. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All right, special exception use permit approval for junkyard use.
I think that's the
Is
same
this
as
the
the
same
last one.
as, yeah, I was just,
Should read for the auto sales. use.
that's what I thought.
And similarly, change the underscore on the second bullet point. Will not change the essential character of the surrounding area.
Got it. Appreciate that.
One last comment,
Yes.
and this relates to the uses on the site. The default plan shows the dumpster and the storage container on the side of the building. That's one item that I don't think we really fleshed out. I think the default position was, my report says to relocate those behind the rear plane of the building. The applicants made their case for keeping them on the side of the building. So that's something also.
Was that the site plan?
Yeah. That's that section
Yeah,
that
it
you
was, it
drew.
was
Yeah.
the thing that we had we had a conversation about that.
Do we,
right,
well, how do we,
fencing
we had the conversation
It
that
would
the fencing
be,
was,
adequate.
Alteration to my recommended condition if you want to allow that to stay where it is, so.
okay.
Yeah, okay, so we would just go back and then for the initial site plan approval, we would amend that to, make sure that we approve the, proposed dumpster.
Dumpster and.
Location and,
Location as drawn.
Yeah.
Did we approach?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to Dan about, we talked about these items in there, so we didn't know how those were going to be approved. You know, so like the architectural of the building, the dumpster and
The sales lot and the light.
okay, so the sales lot is bigger than what's shown on your, on that one sketch. So we just wanted to clarify that to make sure that people understood that, where it is.
My read of the sales lot was that is inside of the C4 zoning boundary on the newest submitted plans, so I didn't see any issues
It's, yeah, the thing that you highlighted on your sketch was just the parking lot, the angled parking lots on the east side, but not the angled parking lots on the west side. So that they would, and then there's the aisle down the middle of them. So that we just wanted,
Could I approach or make
This
that
is,
over?
yeah, so there's three things being discussed here. I think my comments in my report regarding architectural treatment of the building, I think those have been addressed by the fact that we have new renderings of the building, if the planning commission's comfortable with staff looking at that. If the planning commission's comfortable with the location of the fluid and storage container, and come to a consensus on that, but I'd advise you to go back and amend, the site plan motion to say, I'd amend my condition related to that to allow that there. The third point, that the applicant is describing right now relates to the auto sales location. What I think I'm hearing is there's an intent to have automotive sales and display outside of what I've highlighted here, which is not what I interpreted from the plans. And so we need that clarification. And I think that would open this back up to further discussion from the planning commission. At the end of the day, is it reasonable to say, I think what you're saying is these spaces would also be devoted to auto sales?
right.
Well, then that should be something that's clearly spelled out in the motion. 'cause
Yeah,
that's not what-
originally, I think it was gonna be here, but then when everything got moved back because of the, we wanted to get the parking off the road, we moved everything back, including this fence was originally gonna be here, we moved everything back, and I don't believe that yellow line, but you could see the parking spaces were hatched different. That was gonna be our vehicle sales, and it shows as a fenced-in area too on a clear drawing.
This green highlighted area is what I interpreted as your arrows pointing to auto sales locations. So I thought that was just this area.
Yes, this fenced-in lot, there's a red line, it's a fenced-in lot with a gate here, so this is our vehicle sales, which was 2 rows of cars. And I think you had mentioned at our staff meeting that you had 50-foot leeway that you could work with us on without,
So there's a discrepancy here, because the plans that were ended up turned in show the arrows pointing to where it would be in the C4 zone. We did talk about that there is a mechanism for some flexibility up to 50 feet for a special use like that. I just did not interpret that the plan was gonna have to call for that, because it looks like the arrows are pointing to within the C4 boundaries, so I know this is a little confusing here.
Well, we're moving it further west, right?
Correct. This is actually a better one than here. So it's the blow up. and
Yeah,
it's-
but your arrow goes to the existing chain link fence, so it doesn't go to the
It
back.
does, but the note is on this whole area, we have this red
it's
fence
a
around
red
it,
fence
so-
around we've had that from day one.
Okay, so let's, you can step away from that. The zoning ordinance allows some flexibility for the planning commission to decide what's reasonable within 50 feet of a zoning boundary. The issue here is that there was a rezoning to C4, which is outdoor commercial. That was gonna be the area in which automotive sales occurs. So the planning commission has an option to express some leniency.
So this is just a zoning issue.
The planning commission has to affirm whether they're comfortable with that kind of change. I think if there's very clear boundaries shown,
Which they've described.
you can talk about those boundaries and how comfortable you are with those.
I'm comfortable with it. I don't,
I'm comfortable with the boundaries, I'm comfortable with the
Dumpster and
dumpster
storage
location,
container.
as well as the materials on the building, based on the new information, and the screening that the dumpster and fluids have.
I agree. Others?
I just wanted to clarify, so the flexibility you're talking about is to allow for that use to bleed into the industrially zoned property.
There is a mechanism, we've looked at it one time before, if those of you were around in, I think it was late 2015, we had a building on Remembrance Road, it was a tanning salon, and they were looking to be able to use some of the back part of the
Right.
property that was zoned residential. A similar issue came up there, where they wanted to expand some of the commercial operations without rezoning. You can go up to 50 feet per, a section in our zoning ordinance that allows for that, so, I feel confident that you have the mechanism to do that if you say subject to the Walker zoning ordinance provisions, if you're comfortable with that. So let's be clear about where those boundaries are.
Yeah.
And discuss where, and I think you're just talking about the fenced-in area by the diagonal spaces.
Correct.
And that's where you propose to have auto sales and storage.
Correct.
And so the scope of that really is not too far off from the coverage of C4 to begin with. So if you want to allow that kind of change, I think that would be reasonable.
So do we re-go through the motion at this point with the
I
number
would
of
just amend
changes?
it,
Or
just make a motion to amend it.
like,
Might want to ask him if there's anything else.
There is one other item, this is the last item.
Our guy.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was, I thought we were going to be invited back up to talk, I'm sorry. Originally, it was just, you were asking questions.
So we show a light pole on the plan, and we show it as on a 25-foot high. And then, when we met with staff, Dan had mentioned that needs to go down to 20, but then you also said, well, that might be based on the photometric plan. The photometric plan, we did it just recently, XL Electric. We got that to Dan. He hasn't, we just gave him that a few days ago, so he hasn't had time to review that. I do know that in your ordinance, there is something that talks about a maximum of 35-foot high poles. But I guess we're just asking that instead of it just automatically be 20, if it can be what Dan said, and it can be based on the photometric plan.
I'll trade you a 25-foot light pole for a driveway. Let's make a deal, Bob.
Was that photometric at 1-foot candle at the property is typical? Do you know from that
I
report?
think
Bob?
it was less than that.
Okay, because
Yeah.
1 is what the ordinance typically says. So you're less
I
than
think it
that.
was point 3 maybe.
We generally don't specify the height of light poles, do we?
There's a specific zoning district where there is a limit. In this case, my comments were more just about getting it to the point where you have low enough light or dimly lit enough light that you're not spilling light onto the adjacent residential properties. So as long as the photometric plan shows that,
That's kind of the way I took it from what you said, so I don't think that needs to be addressed.
Okay.
So we can, anything else?
We'd like, if we could leave it at 25, we'd like 25. For the security, there's quite a bit of graffiti out there. It's an area light. We really need the height for the, instead of more lights, I think 125 would be great if it works.
As long as it meets the photometric plan. So, you wanna,
Perfect. I will amend my motion for the site plan approval in case 17-759 to include the following conditions. I want to amend the condition in the staff planner's packet that to permit the storage container and dumpster to be on the side of the project that
as
we,
on the plan.
as proposed on the plan. And I also want to amend it to allow 2 rows of sales subject to the Walker zoning ordinance, as shown on the plan as well. Does that cover it?
Okay, we have a motion. Is there support? Support by Elena. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You wish to continue?
All right, jumping back to the special exception use permit approval for auto sales for case 17-759. I will make a motion to approve the requested special exception use permit based on the site plan set revision dated 9/20/2018 and supporting application materials for the proposed improvements in the Weller Auto Project site specific to the auto sales use. Conditions, the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the staff planner's letter dated 9/26/2018. Findings of fact per section 94-250 of the Walker zoning ordinance. The use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public. The use will not change the essential character of the surrounding area. The use will not harm the use or enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity. The use will not substantially diminish or impair property values within the area. The use will not result in any significant adverse impact on the natural environment. The use will not impede the orderly development and improvement of surrounding property. Adequate utilities, roads, and drainage will be provided. And the use will adhere to applicable local, state, and federal laws.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Terry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Is there more?
Yes, I think we've got one more. For case 17-759, I will make a motion to approve the requested stormwater variance for relief from the following items for the proposed improvements at Weller Auto Project Site. 100-year stormwater detention requirements, 10-year storm sewer capacity design, max outflow rate of 0.13 CFS per acre, except in Zone C. Conditions of stormwater variance approval, the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 9/25/2018.
Okay, is there a motion by Steve for the stormwater variance? Is there support?
Support.
Support by Elena. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Not to say that we don't want to see you again, but. Yeah.
Very tired.
Holy smokes. Case number 18-813, Poor Boys Concrete Company, 1890 Bristol Avenue, Northwest, site plan review and public hearing. Owner Poor Boys Concrete LLC has applied seeking site plan review to construct a 3,000 square foot general storage building, a 5,300 square foot general storage building, and related site improvements, including paving and stormwater improvements. The proposal will also involve variance requests for relief from certain requirements of the City of Walker Stormwater Ordinance, which requires a public hearing under Walker Code Section 67-36. Dan?
It's on the wrong screen.
Is it warm in here?
No, you're having a hot flash.
I'm getting old, but
You got your shorts on?
no.
You should have wore shorts.
Eat a little. All right, so here's a site. I'm gonna jump right into what's being proposed here. Some of you may be familiar with this as the Kent County Animal Shelter site from back in the day, and then there were
Humane
other
Society.
uses.
Humane Society.
Humane Society site. Kent County Humane Society site. And then there were two other uses between then and now, but what we have now being proposed is a couple of new buildings on the site to be used as basically a contractor yard and contractor storage space for a concrete company. So this layout shows you what's being proposed. There's a 3,000 square foot building and a 5,300 square foot building, both purportedly for storage, equipment storage, and that's it. There's not much in the way of floor plans or detail on the inside of the buildings that we're aware of, because that's what this has been pitched as, is basically storage buildings. Also, a proposal for some expanded hard surface paving in the front and the addition of some millings in the back of the site, and stormwater detention and pretreatment. And so a variance was requested and successfully obtained to free the two storage buildings up from a requirement to connect to public water and public sewer. That was just last Wednesday with the planning commission, with the zoning board of appeals. The planning commission has a two-part review role here to review the stormwater variance and the site plan. We can talk about that a little further. In this case, the stormwater variance is only for the 100-year detention. But here's the site. You have adjacent residential in various forms. You have the Richmond Hills Apartments to the east. There are only a few lots to the north of City of Grand Rapids platted properties. And there's, I think, 3 unplatted residential lots in Walker. What you don't see on this image is just to the north is Indian Mill Creek. And much of the odd-shaped triangular area in the back of this site is conservation easement. And there's some history behind how that conservation easement was formed. I'll talk about that on that slide. So here's the zoning. You have, like I mentioned, there's residential nearby. So you have industrial zoning next to residential land use that could cause some friction. So it's really important to think about things like truck routing, landscape buffering, noise and light generation and dust, things like that, that impact residential quality of life. You can see the creek being prominent to the north of the site, and there's an easement over part of that the creek's drainage course. So to get into the history a little bit, what we're aware of is the animal shelter site was built in 1970. There was a landscaping company at one point. There was a automotive repo, repossessed automobile lot, so kind of tying this back to the last project we looked at. And over the course of those different evolutions of this site, there was a conservation easement imposed on a large swath of the rear of the property. And much of that is wetland or floodplain, related to the Indian Hill Creek as kind of a localized floodplain. So the key review factors here are, some of the things I just mentioned: adjacent land use, environmental, how is this site being used, and the connection to utilities, and details and procedural items. So in terms of sensitivity to adjacent land use, my big focus areas are, let's make sure this is an opportunity well used to clean up the site and get rid of those cars stored on the site right now. So let's remove any existing repossessed vehicles from the site. Make sure that we are very clearly adhering to the truck routing, so this site is gonna be bound to that Bristol to Panel truck route that we talked about extensively at the last meeting. And make sure that it is buffered from the adjacent residential land uses. In terms of the site, sensitive environmental aspect of the site, there needs to be clarity on how this site relates to the conservation easement and how the site relates to the floodplain elevation. There's a 100-year floodplain elevation of 738 that was shown on the plans. I think we need some clear detail on how that number was derived. And initially there was a number, that number was selected as a draft FEMA floodplain map. We need to see something, at the end of the day, this needs to be endorsed by the city engineer, so it'd be important to see how that localized floodplain was determined.
I wouldn't say endorsed,
And
accepted.
accepted by.
You know, it's gotta be endorsed by the design engineer.
Endorsed by the design engineer is what I meant to say, yeah. Accepted
No
by the city.
objection by the city engineer.
That's right, yeah. So we need a clear floodplain. What we're interpreting this use as is new building material sales and storage, including trade contractors and related storage yards. So in other words, this is not what we call material processing and mineral storage. It's not a concrete batch plant. There's not gonna be any concrete products here. It's strictly a place for the concrete company to use as their base of operations. There's a kind of a rough sketch here showing the importance of, if there is a change in use in those buildings, the connection to sanitary is really important, because you wanna have a mechanism to properly drain waste fluids and separate the oils from the sanitary sewer. So if you leave it as it is and you do automotive repair in a building that has no sewer connection, you run the risk of having waste materials run off site and get into the stormwater system. And especially being this close to Indian Mill Creek, that is a definite thing we want to avoid. So the ZBA had some foresight on this and said, we'll grant the variance from connection to sanitary and public water only if you aren't using those buildings as automotive repair. So that's a really important condition, that we clarify the use and make sure no automotive repair occurs in these buildings.
Is that your, did you make those drawings?
It was a beautiful, yeah, I don't know what that vehicle is, but.
Or is it Scott's 12-year-old?
Zamboni.
Oh, it's a Zamboni, okay.
Yeah, that was a beautiful sketch of. So at the end of my report, I can boil my conditions down to, well, sorry, this is just the procedural comments, but procedurally, we need to go through the permitting, making sure what the ZBA said shows up on the final plan, submitting the final plans to the Community Development Department, and once things become operational, business license needs to be applied for. Those are just the procedural comments. I already kind of clarified my other conditions in the rest of my slides.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any initial questions?
I have one for, sorry if I butted in, but on your term of repair, that's kind of a wide spectrum. Does that include changing oil, greasing, changing fluids? What's the limit? Because you have different levels of repair issues.
Yeah, I think anything that would result in draining fluids from a vehicle. So light maintenance, I think there's something that we would want to tie back to in the sanitary sewer code that we borrow from the city of Grand Rapids, because we use their sanitary sewer system, where it says There's some specific language about what type of automotive repair requires a sanitary connection and an oil-water separator. So I think really my conditions should say, the intent of what the ZBA was trying to say is anything that would require a oil-water separator and automotive work that would otherwise require a connection to the sanitary system.
Does that kind of get shifted over to the building permit side of things then, as they look at the plans and whatever they're doing at that point?
It should.
Okay.
So we can always kind of fortify that through how we review this.
Other questions?
You had mentioned that there were asphalt millings were gonna be used on a portion of the site. I didn't see that laid out in the plan.
And it may be crushed concrete. I think in the rear, maybe the engineers can explain. I think there is gonna be over the existing gravel in the rear of the site, is there gonna be another layer of material? Or did I have that wrong?
Zach Volkmore and Bruce Inc. We've had conversations with our surveyors about what they call gravel. If you go back there and look at what's actually there now, it's a mixture of crushed asphalt, crushed concrete, maybe some gravel. So it's a mixture of stuff that's been spread out there over years. Our plan is to scarify that and put down either crushed concrete or crushed asphalt. Probably crushed concrete over top of that, just to stabilize that surface. Does that make sense?
So all those parking and maneuvering areas between the buildings would be treated in that fashion? Thank you.
Now, I was of the understanding in the front of the site, there are striped parking spaces on a hard paved surface.
We are going to stripe the existing hard surface. We're not adding hard surface parking anywhere on the site. The stripes are long gone, so be restriping it is all.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dan initially? Otherwise, Scott?
First off, I apologize, I can't breathe too well. Tom's cologne's really got me, so I'm all plugged up, and I walked in here. So bear with me.
You know, this is televised.
Yeah, they could hear me too, unfortunately. The sanitary sewer issue, I wrote in here, they're seeking a variance. I think I wrote this before they actually got that. But we just want to reiterate what Dan said. If they're going to be doing any kind of mechanics work, if they're going to have a lift, mechanics on staff, that's the kind of stuff that we got to take care of now with the new building. There's no reason to fool around with putting in a cold storage building and then 6 months later pretend that it's still cold storage if there's a lift in there and they're, doing a lot of stuff with, like Dan said, fluids right next to the creek. This site has a very checkered past and we don't want to mess with that stuff. Talked about, how the fact that this is basically just cold storage. There's no proposal, to do like clean out of the concrete truck itself. A lot of times when the concrete's done pouring, they spray it out, they find a spot. It's not like it was in the old days where you just go off to the side of the road and pour that out anymore. You've got to have a dedicated place on your site to dispose of that waste, leftover concrete, that extra quarter yard or whatever you have to clean out. That's not what this site's for. So we don't want to see anything like that happening here. Any kind of cleaning or processing or anything like that should really trigger another review with this group to help protect ourselves from getting into environmental trouble here. We shared all the reports with the DEQ on this. We did a ton of research, and we still can't figure out exactly what happened the last time around, where all the gravel went in. There was, I believe, almost an acre of wetland that was filled. A lot of things happened here that were not permitted by the city. Somehow the DEQ got involved and was able to clean most of that up, so we're glad. We just don't want to go down that path again. The stormwater variance, they are going to be able to provide the first flush, but they're going to be a little short. They might want to talk about their calculation. Obviously, they're not going to be bringing the whole site into compliance, but they're going to try to bring the newer areas in, but I think Zach can touch on that. And we talked about, we don't know how the gravel got there, but we need to address it with making sure that it's pervious. That's it.
Questions for Scott?
Just a comment, you might want to be a little careful with that crushed concrete that close to the creek. DEQ is kind of giddy about the alkalis from runoff from crushed concrete.
They've been copied on our reports to make sure they're fully engaged.
Okay.
Okay. Zach, questions for the applicant?
I'd offer a comment. It looks like with what's there right now and what you're proposing to do is a definite improvement on the site, so go for it.
I just have one other, are you gonna make a
I'm
comment?
just going to introduce, this is Taylor Stonehouse, representing the
Okay.
owner of the building.
I have a
If
question.
any questions about the use, just to reiterate, we are not proposing that the use be for maintenance of vehicles. It is cold storage, and I think Scott described it well, where you're out finishing concrete, you get done, and, the concrete truck leaves, you spray your tools off, or however they do that. They come back with clean tools. So there's no washing, no processing, none of that planned here. It's simply a place to put tools inside, so.
Just to follow up on that, do you guys have a pumper truck, or you rent that, or who uses, where does that end up getting cleaned out?
That'd be subbed out.
You
Concrete.
don't have your own truck, you're gonna have to clean out, it's not like it's a Consumers Concrete where they do their own truck, because a lot of times if you own your own pumper, then where do you clean that out?
Right.
So you,
Yeah, any
you don't have
ready,
that.
ready mix trucks, pump trucks, all of that are subbed out through
Okay.
other plants.
Okay.
Other questions?
What about all the vehicles that are there now? It looks like an auto repair place.
Good question. There, I think Dan already spoke on that. It was a repo company that was in
Oh, I
there.
know.
They're still working on getting their vehicles out. I'm not gonna say that some of the supplies and machines there aren't the concrete companies, but that's a reason for the storage building, to be able to clean that up, store trucks, trailers, machines inside the large storage building on the back side of the property. That's the purpose of that building, is to clean up the site. So, but a lot of the vehicles that were repo vehicles that are not running, basically just sitting there, those are on their way out.
You can take them over to Alpine and Ann.
What about the floodplain?
We've been researching the floodplain and trying to get an answer out of the DEQ. They move slow. Today I actually got a call back, and I didn't tell you this, Scott, from Jake Patton, who talked to Matt Acapente. He didn't have a definite answer for me, but he said they would likely use the draft FEMA contours, which is what we used to establish that 38.1 elevation. He's going to get back to me this week, so. The thing that makes me feel kind of good about that is that bridge deck over on Bristol, over the creek, is the elevation 643. And the creek flows east, obviously. So that means our elevation is less than the 643 that was identified. And I talked with Jake at the DEQ about that, but he's going to get back to me this week. It's just, takes a
That has
while
be
to get any
clarified before
response out of
anything-
them.
I mean, a condition of approval that has to be clarified, correct?
I think the way we're gonna look at that is that we want to mimic the standards for an official floodplain like you'd see on the Grand River. And before a building permit gets issued, make sure that there's a verified floodplain elevation, that you're building 1 foot above that finished floor.
But be careful, we don't have a FEMA designated floodplain number here because it's not on a FEMA designated water body. We're too far from the Grand River. So what we've done is given them resources and said, you need to pick a number and stand behind it and seal it, and that's for protection of public health, safety, and welfare stuff, the buildings and making sure that everything's safe. I don't think anybody's gonna give them a number and say, this is the number you have to use. So they've gotta kind of look at this with their engineering subjectivity and pick that number and stand behind it.
Okay.
It was a little dangerous, because before we provided them some information, and we said, so where did you get the number? And they said, well, you gave us the number. And we said, did we? No, we just gave them some information to help them another number.
Pick any number.
But at the end of the day, logically, I'll go back to the bridge deck, being at that 643, and any water getting to our side of the street has got to flow under that bridge, which makes me feel pretty good about that 638 number, but I'm going to feel better when the DEQ gives me their nod
So
too.
you'll be signing on something then?
What's that?
You'll be signing something.
Sure. And our proposed finished floor elevations are above that, obviously, so.
How many people are gonna be on this site? Staff, or is there offices, or?
Around a dozen. It's a smaller company, but and it's not a customer come to the site type of thing. It's operate the company out of this site. Trucks come in, park there. Employee vehicles will park there, and that's about it.
Here's a loaded question. Are there gonna be any mechanics on site?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So how many trucks are you gonna approximately store there?
I couldn't give you an exact number. There's a couple F-350 trucks and trailers. They have a form trailer, a flat work trailer, and then some other machines, a mini excavator and Bobcat and things like that will be stored in the building.
But you don't do your own repairs,
No, and that, I'm glad that topic came up of, I believe, is it Tim? Yeah, I mentioned that, greasing up, a grease gun, greasing up Zerks on machines and things like that. I'm sure those are items that will be, just done by the company.
Yeah, that's not changing fluids.
Right, exactly. So, simple maintenance, that's it.
Seriously, you're close to Indian Mill Creek, and that is you do something there, you're gonna be in a lot of trouble.
Get those leaky cars away from the creek too.
Other questions, comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by, Jason, you are here. Motion by Jason, is there support? Support by Elaine, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? If you would like to address this case, please approach please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Motion to close.
Motion by Jason to close, is there support?
Support.
Support by Elaine, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, other questions and comments? Yeah, it looks like it will clean up the site. That thing's been an eyesore for a while. Have you talked to the neighbors? They got noticed, right?
Our only neighbors to the south of us and to the north, or to the east, they're quite a ways away.
Yeah, but you know how neighbors can be sometimes.
Motion?
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. Case number 18-813, make a motion to approve the site plan set dated August 2018 and supporting application material for the proposed improvements on the property located at 1890 Bristol Avenue Northwest. Applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the staff planning letter dated 9/26/18. Applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 9, what was that? I missed that. 25. As a third additional comment, do we need to enter into the record the ZBA decision on this?
That was included in my report.
Number 1 there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't need to include it then?
I think, no, that can stand on its own. You're good.
Okay.
We have a motion by Jason, is there support?
Support.
Support by Steve, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Case number 18-813, make a motion to approve the requested stormwater variance for relief from the following items for the proposed improvements at the site located at 1890 Bristol Avenue Northwest. 100-year stormwater detention requirements. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 9/25/2018.
A motion by Jason, is there support?
Support.
Support by Tim, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Panel comes out well.
What was that?
Sitting there, panel and Alpine, you gotta wait a long time.
You have to take that up with the city.
Would you
Grand
like
Rapids.
to join my committee of one to get, okay.
Yep.
Case number 18-812, RJM Cummings, Standale Townhome, Live Work Development, 349 Cummings Avenue Northwest, site plan review, discussion item. Applicant 349 Cummings LLC, on behalf of owner Gerald F. Baltes, seeks site plan review for Phase 1 improvements on the 1.2 acre lot located at 349 Cummings Avenue Northwest, which is zoned Standale Downtown District. The proposal includes 12 multiple-family residential units in 3-story buildings with total footprint area of 7212 square feet, along with parking, stormwater improvements, landscaping, and a layout for future Phase 2 improvements, including a 2-unit, 2,080 square foot live-work building site. This is a discussion item. There won't be any formal action on it. Right, Dan?
Well, it's been noticed as a site plan review, initially framed up that way, where there could be an action on the case, but I think staff would be more comfortable, the applicant, and we've talked through the process with them. If we break this down and kind of offer this as kind of a first step review, kind of a more informal discussion, that's the way we're gonna recommend it. There is a motion sheet there in case you want to do a final decision tonight. But there's a recommendation to table for a little bit more detail. Or a lot of detail depending on which way you go. So with that, do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Comments? Okay. I don't normally do this. I got, I think, a really good piece of information today from the applicants, and I think it's worth showing because it's going to help us guide the conversation along. If I can just pull it up. You might have that with you.
Yeah, I have a hard time.
So here's a much more, oh no, all right.
Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, well, you saw us speak for 1 second. So we'll come back to that. Maybe we'll be able to pull that out.
You want to show it on the, what we got there?
I'll go through my slides and then we can point to that. So, thanks for your patience, 49 team and NDA is here as well. I see to see what's going on with this project. So, got to learn more about vastly different couple of sites and how we review those. But now we're into Standale, and we start to see more and more activity here with the Westtown project having come in recently, and we have this site and another site as potential development sites for townhome style residential development. So there's some exciting momentum building here, and we want to make sure that where we can, we use the opportunity to bring things into compliance with the Standale Downtown District code that Planning Commission worked really hard on over the years, and staff has worked hard on. So the request, kind of the default request here is for a two-phase project with 3 buildings. What we're calling the Phase 2 project requires more detail, and I think we all agree on that. That's something that we've kind of shelved, at least in our early discussions for now. We don't have a lot of the cross-section between that building and the Cummings Street right-of-way. Those kinds of things have to be worked out, and how the Standale district details plug into that part of the site has to be worked out. What's more at the forefront of this project is the 2 buildings in the rear, so that would include 12 townhome units in those 2 buildings. They are each 3 floors, and it's basically the layout that you saw during the rezoning review a couple of months ago. With a little bit more detail provided. Here's an architectural rendering of the building, some pretty interesting architectural choices and pretty attractive rendering, a lot of definition to the kind of the horizontal as well as the vertical space, so I think this is something that moves the building itself in the right direction. But that's just to give you an idea of what's being proposed here. So orienting back to the site, we looked at this a couple of months ago at the rezoning. You are just to the south of the new brew pub and the Moondrop Herbals business there on Cummings, on the west side of Cummings, south of Lake Michigan Drive. Currently, as of recently, has been used for a single-family rental home. Zoned now for Standale Downtown District, and that lines up with what it's been planned for in terms of this being a swath of a property that was included in the 2007 Standale Future Land Use Plan and designated as a mixed-use site. Not too much to worry about on the site itself, although this map I think is a little outdated because there have been wetlands found just on the southern border. And another thing that doesn't appear on this kind of restrictions map is the fact that there's a roughly 40-foot wide stretch on the eastern end of the site that is covered by a consumer's property easement. So there are some restrictions that don't show up on this map. But one of the other things here is that the topography falls from west to east on the site. So phase two, we're gonna look at later. There's the consumer's power easement roughly on the east end of the site. This kind of shows the site in context with what is pending and what's there now. You have the future access drive from the Westtown project coming up on the south, and businesses along Lake Michigan to the north. So really what we need to get down to is the fact that the Standale Downtown District Code calls for the development of a traditional pedestrian-oriented downtown and has a whole slew of forms and standards that gear sites up for that type of application. And I think I'm gonna skip that last slide, which just talks about how this is a secondary frontage area within the Standale zoning. But some highlights of the Standale code, there's a wide array of uses you can have, but you need to meet a certain form. It's a prescriptive zoning ordinance that basically gives you a checklist for items that you have to hit for certain types of uses. So I'm going to focus what I talk about here on the items that just are not addressed right now with the current concept. That leads into kind of a detail-oriented discussion about the concept that they show right now, as well as kind of a broad level discussion about the orientation of this layout. Kind of at a broad level, does it work the way it's oriented towards kind of a parking lot in the back of the site, tucked away from Cummings Avenue and not having any kind of frontage towards Cummings? So that's kind of a fundamental question. Do you like the layout that you see generally, and do you think you can work with that? Without some more detail and some more programming, we're really not quite to the point where we're hitting the code with what's being shown right now. And I think a better way to hit the code may be to look at some design alternatives, including orienting the buildings towards more of a courtyard or more of an open space connection to the front of the site. And that's something that I think should be talked about. But if you're going point by point on the concept that's shown here, these are in no particular order other than this is the way they're listed in the zoning ordinance, so I'll go through them one by one. When we get to the point where we're deciding whether we want to be lenient on any of these standards, there are some findings of fact that I'll ask you to use when you're ready to make a decision on the project, which you can decide when you want to do that, but it may not be tonight, so I'll skip those couple of slides that have all the findings. So getting right down to the parts of the zoning ordinance we don't meet, we have the requirement that there's a minimum 12-foot first floor height. In my opinion, the intent of that requirement is really to establish a very prominent pedestrian-oriented, very prominent first floor that's adjacent to the public right-of-way. So in other words, if your building isn't right up next to the street right-of-way, this particular standard may not be as important. And when you developed the master plan for this area, you had some example images that showed kind of the Brooklyn brownstone type of townhome that you would envision being right up against a public street and would be a really desirable kind of form to have for residential on a street next to a downtown area. When your buildings are tucked away from the public street frontage, this type of standard may not be as important. Same goes for the requirement of an elevated first floor, which is 3 feet above the ground level. And same with the requirement for porches in the front of units. Now here's one that kind of leads into that broader issue I was describing, which is that there needs to be a main entrance facing the front lot line. What you have, kind of the default plan showing is a main entrance that faces towards a parking area. I think there were some physical constraints that made this the best choice for stormwater management, the most straightforward choice for stormwater management and grading. But the intent of the code in this regard, I think, calls for something more that would orient the building so that they're facing towards Cummings, not facing towards, on the north end especially, you have the Taco Bell and you have the Mr. Car Wash. So really orienting the site more in its own public sphere on Cummings as opposed to kind of just having the buildings sit back there. These two standards I talked about, the front porch and the raised finished floor, I think if you're not abutting a public street, not immediately adjacent to public street, that might not be as important. Those types of requirements are going to be more important for the live-work building that you look at in phase 2. There's a requirement that 15% of the materials of the facade need to be approved. In this sense, approved means windows and doors. one of the benefits and costs of this project is that you have this design that has the garage doors feeding into the buildings. And that has a functional aspect. It's gonna be good for the tenants that wanna use them, but it also kind of takes a part of the facade that would otherwise be friendly to a pedestrian environment and turns it into a garage door. Whereas the code really calls for more door openings and window openings at a pedestrian scale. So I think that's where the 15% windows and doors is meant to cover, and they're not too far off. I think there's a lot of desirable facade materials shown and some interesting materials shown, but just as far as windows and doors are only at roughly 12%. And then the last two I'll call out are that there needs to be a designated kind of publicly used active open space on the site. And so as opposed to an open lawn that has no, what I call site programming, what we want to see is at least 15% of the site devoted to some, kind of some key that's specific to this project that people buy into and associate with this project. So something where you have a public space with benches, picnic tables, a formalized gathering area. And this is where this leads into kind of the phase 2 discussion. Can some of these elements be shared between the live-work building and the residential building in the rear? We were talking today, and the developer can speak to this, those buildings will be all part of the same kind of campus. They're gonna be condominium-style ownership. So there's gonna be a definite relation between the live-work building and the residential buildings in the back. But just strictly in terms of the provision of open space for the townhome buildings, that is something that's lacking in the plan that we've seen so far. And that's why I'm glad, again, I know we haven't had time to review it, but you can see that they're making progress with what they turned in today to show that they're adding some common space.
He didn't see that, so.
Right. They just turned it, that's exactly right. But they are showing that they're working towards that for the next step. Review. So that's why what you see is what I'm speculating on is a big question. What is that programming? But then you have to step back and say, is this the type of layout that we want to see overall? Are you comfortable with a 2-building layout, relatively close to those commercial land uses? Or would you be more comfortable with something that orients the buildings inside of the site? Certainly want to give the applicants an opportunity to clarify why they designed it the way they did. But I also think it's our obligation to show alternatives that kind of lend themselves closer to the intent of the Standale zoning. But either way, the next step is for you folks to provide some direction, kind of help guide what you're comfortable with in terms of the overall concept. And then if you are comfortable with the concept they show, where we can get into some of the details and where you might be comfortable with. I gave some of my recommendations on redundancy based on what they show. Maybe Scott has some early comments on this one too.
Okay, Scott?
Mine are pretty thin here. First off, the cross-access easement to the south, I think it talked about that for the future. We've never had a future easement that's worked out, ever. So that should be recorded and give it to CDD early on before building permits, obviously, or we won't get it. There's some slopes down to the wetland area that are a little bit steep for us. I sound like a broken record. We want to make sure there's a special seed mix or special ground cover that's used there, and it's not just slopped together with grass seed and then expected to be mowed. And then, last thing was about a mailbox bank. They should probably address that.
Okay, any questions for Scott and Dan?
Just in terms of the Standale code, first got on the commission, I think that it had been already developed at that point in time. But I'm just wondering, was there a characterization on how this would stack out from the, starting from the frontage on M45 Lake Michigan Drive, coming back off from that main thoroughfare and coming back into this kind of a transition area?
Yeah, I have an image in my head that shows what you're talking about. There's something in the 2007 sub-area 4 master plan that shows kind of that gradient. And it's really showing the ideal gradient, because you have a lot of existing conditions out there that might not have been, may or may not be met with the code, but you have kind of the commercial mixed use, frontages, the primary frontages, and then you have a gradient of mixed types of residential back on the side streets, in Cummings and then into what they call the neighborhood frontage areas. The idea is to kind of increase the density and activity closer to the main M roads.
What I'm talking about is you've got the east-west of Lake Michigan Drive, and you're gonna have frontage there. And then I'm presuming, as you get back to a certain distance, that you may have another parallel, more local roadway that, again, that the units could face upon.
Right. Yeah.
And right here, it seems like there's wetlands here, there's a elevation change as much as the finished floor between the buildings to the west and one to the east is about an 8-foot differential. And it's not that perfect level area where you can get the form-based type of a code feel to it.
Yep. I think those constraints are there, and I also agree that there's, some of what you're describing is, for example, the alley behind the businesses east of Cummings, you have what could evolve into kind of a secondary roadway there.
Yeah.
And some of the land uses that develop south of that over time may have a more easy, route into that part of the code.
And that's why I was wondering whether or not there was a schematic early on that would kind of show whether or not that alleyway that's along the businesses to the east was envisioned to run toward Wilson. I think that would be helpful for us to be able to figure out whether this is a good use.
A good transition,
Yeah.
Well, when I see SDD, I think of them very strict. That this has been worked on, and that here you have your rules and you follow your rules. But this is a border to that, so where does the leniency come in? I mean, I don't mind the project the way it looks, it doesn't quite follow the SDD. I'd like to see phase 2 follow the SDD much closer. If we could see that together, I think, because this is back off the road, I mean, this,
Would it be fair to say too, Dan, that some of this was written more in line with the M45 corridor? When you talk about a 12-foot first floor with storefront and that kind of thing, you know, as a criteria versus more in a neighborhood or back tucked behind with restraints like something like this has with grade and around the corner, L-shaped?
Yes and no, because I think the 12-foot applies to any townhome, and the townhomes can be on the side streets.
Okay.
But I think to your point, it was meant to be more where you have the opportunity to build right adjacent to the public street. So, right at that interface, and where you get farther back into a site,
Sure.
that kind of code may not be as relevant.
So that, getting back to your point, that this front building, which we haven't seen, would be more in keeping with a strict interpretation versus the restraints that this site would have.
yeah, you know, if we're gonna have leniency. Anyway, would the applicant like to say anything? State your name for the record, please.
Commissioners, my name is Steve Whitty from Netterveld, here tonight representing 349 Cummings LLC. With me in attendance tonight is Eric Jones, who's a member of the LLC, and then he's also with RJM Properties. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration regarding this request. I think you guys fully understand kind of the issues that we're facing. Dan did an excellent job, as always, giving you an overview of it. The biggest criteria, I guess I see, or the biggest question marks relate to the SDD code and more or less specifically with the architecture of it. As was indicated, the townhome buildings that we're talking about now, they are roughly 200 feet off of Cummings. It's an L-shaped property, and there's significant grade challenges for it. I've actually got a total of, I think, 16 different concept layouts on the site, and this, quite frankly, is the one that works best. We've looked at courtyards, we've looked at different rotations, we've looked at different sizes, and quite frankly, this is the one that works best. So we'd appreciate your consideration on that, your comments on that. I can go through point by point the deviation from the DDA, but again, the issue that I see is my understanding of the SDD code, as you guys have indicated, is really when the buildings are next to streets or have that prominent view. These buildings, again, are 200 feet off Cummings, behind other buildings, and again, this really works for us. So any input you have on layout-wise, I'd be more than happy to answer that, tell you why we did what we did. If you have any questions on the architecture, I know we did submit renderings as well as the architectural drawings. The renderings, the color was a little bit off on that, so Eric brought some sample boards if you wanted to see what the materials actually look like and feel like. We did just today, Designscapes did a more elaborate landscape plan showing more plantings. And then you can see on the screen, we've got a picnic area in the northeast corner of the site. And then the other thing to point out on the community feel for it is each of these units will have rear yard balconies and patios. So we view that as a gathering space as well. So hopefully that gives you an overview. I can talk about the utilities when we're meeting everything the city is requiring of us. So I think we're good there, but it really, again, boils down to that SDD code and the layout and as it relates to that. So again, I really appreciate your time. I can get into more detail on anything you'd like me to. We would love your approval tonight, but we understand that staff wants to get your input before doing that. So if you're not comfortable with approving it tonight, we'll see you next meeting. But if you have any questions, again, we'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Questions or comments?
I have a question, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead.
Have you considered the mailbox question that Scott had?
Yeah,
brought
we're
up?
going to have a central location for that. We're kind of working out the details of that, but we are going to have a central location.
What's your flavor for that right now?
What's that?
Where are you thinking on that?
It'll probably be, we'll have to coordinate that with the post office, obviously, but it'd probably be somewhere, along the main drive, like here. But again, we'll
Left-hand
coordinate that with
side.
the post office too, because we want it to be convenient not only for the people who live there, but then also the post office. I guess another thing to point out that I think is important to the project, and Dan kind of alluded to it one time, and then he kind of mis-alluded to it the next time. The two buildings in the back, they're going to be owner occupied. They're not going to be leased spaces, so you're not going to get tenants there. They're actually owners living there.
How do you prevent an owner from renting it?
True.
No,
I don't know if there's, I guess you could maybe do it in the bylaws if you wanted to.
Name for the record, please?
Yep, Eric Jones, RJM Properties, appreciate your time. That'll be in bylaws of the condo association, that they will always remain homeowner occupied. So they'll never be leased out to college kids or tenants. That's how we'd handle that.
okay. That's the answer.
What's the plan for phase two?
Phase two will happen after, while phase one is being under construction. We've got details that we need to work out with staff on that. As was indicated, that front building and area will be developed more to the DDA standards. And then we'll obviously come back through you guys to get input and approval.
My
of
worry
that.
is that we approve this and then nothing happens on the front.
We really need the front part to happen to make the project pencil out, so.
Okay.
When we first submitted this plan, we were submitting it as one project, and then talking to staff, it was recommended that we break the two apart.
Well, you'll have to come back to us with that one, and
Correct. And hopefully you don't beat us up too bad with that
we'll
one.
hold your feet to the fire on that one more.
Yes,
So,
understood. And that, again, I understand that, because that, again, is fronting on
Fronting
Cummings.
on
and
Cummings.
Yes.
Other questions?
I have a statement more than anything.
That's,
Are we doing public hearing? This wasn't a public
there's
hearing.
no public hearing, no.
So generally, I'm kind of in favor of actually moving forward on this phase of it. I'm not in favor on phase two. I think there needs to be quite a bit of work. But I don't know if you wanted to take a kind of pulse to see where everybody else is at on that. I think there's a few things that we could work through to kind of get them moving on this part. And then a recommendation on some phase two things. I like that there, it looked like there was a cross-access agreement there. And then all the things that meet the DDA items for phase two seem to make sense. I think leniency on these buildings because they're in the back, what I would call screened and or protected. The other part is that these fit and flow quite nice to what we've already previously approved with the Goodale that's coming in through there. So I feel like this works and is fine with what we were thinking, and even though it doesn't meet the DDA to the letter, it feels like this is one of those times where an exception works out good, and to see this project come through, I think would be nice.
Other opinions?
I agree.
I would tend to agree with Jason. It's not, I mean, how big a jerks do we want to be?
Scott, from your standpoint,
Why did he call me?
didn't have,
Dan's hiding, he's down below out of sight.
I don't want to be a jerk.
you didn't have
Sorry,
much
Tim.
comment on utilities, but everything seemed to be in order for you. I mean, you just said there's not a whole lot here, but
No, the engineering on the site's a little bit difficult, but it's all been worked out in advance.
Okay.
Just those
Oh,
couple,
we went through him.
very minimal items.
Oh, no, he said,
Yeah.
we didn't skip you.
I was afraid that we skipped you when you
thought-
did.
I said, how big of jerks do we want to be? And Tim said, Scott. Started to ask me a question, so.
That's my job tonight, I guess.
And the only other thing I would add to that is the landscape plan, even though we didn't spend a tremendous amount of time on it, I thought was very clean and nice. And they were able to find ample spaces to create a public area. I think also that the backs of the buildings, even though they're being used as slopes, would be considered areas that would be, usable to the tenants too. So
To respond to Jason, just pull up the landscape plan again, just for reference, but I also, just to steal a little bit of time, to respond to Terry's earlier question or observation about the Standale intent. This is what it would have looked like in an ideal, kind of a blank slate. So we have, I think, in our spot, this, we have, this is kind of four corners right there, that's Cummings and Lake Michigan. You have some transitional development, and then you have, what the access drive of the Westtown project could someday, at least partially evolve to be, where you have townhomes facing, kind of a secondary street frontage, at a couple different points, so it's not inconceivable that you get to have some of that form evolve over time, but there are a lot of constraints in the way of this kind of gradient becoming reality.
Are the topos easier to work with as they go further to the east?
I think it's still a creek, it's still a drain, that kind of.
yeah, Talma Creek runs through there. There's
Yeah.
a lot of swamp behind Standale lumber, so that's,
Yeah, you don't want to,
that's about the limit to what you can do south on the east side of Cummings.
There are a couple landlocked lots back there, if I remember right, that, there's a chance something cool could happen, but it's a long shot.
Yeah.
well, and this
South of
picture,
the drive, I mean.
this picture kind of emphasizes that the frontage on Lake Michigan Drive is where we really are going to concentrate on the SDD. The further you get back, it gets a little less.
Well, it's a different type of,
Yeah, it is.
it gets into more residential
Residential.
through there.
Well, the SDD does clarify different zones within the SDD.
Yeah.
Depending, and Cummings just happens to be one of the arterial roads that they require that kind of thing, depending on north or south where you go. I think Kinney is one, but,
So that driveway, that's, is the back door to the frontage properties on, to the east of Cummings. That's a little bit north of where this driveway is into this property, correct?
Yes.
There's a little bit of an offset.
yeah, see, this is what feeds the back of, like the laundromat and Jake's. So their drive is shared with this group. There's no frontage out of what they have here. It's
Yeah,
the easement that comes right through here.
here's their entrance, and this is where you're
Yeah.
talking, so there's offset.
Well, I was wondering whether or not this drive coming in off from Cummings that they show on this, that goes alongside 351 Cummings, could be that just the extension of the parallel. It's gonna be dropped down a little bit to the south, and can that continue on?
You have to move the
Between-
dumpster.
Well, yeah, move the dumpster.
Well, this is all the new stuff for Mr.
Yeah,
Car Wash. They go way back behind here.
Okay.
So they've just developed all those vacuums and it goes right to the back of the
So the
south
best
part
we
of that
could do
property.
here is that it would stub right here and wait for some point way down the
Sure.
road.
Well, then,
More likely is to the south where the west.
yeah,
Drive
again,
will
this
come
is
out.
where this is connecting to south,
Oh,
to that
gotcha.
other,
Yeah.
that's what this easement was for.
That's where
For
the,
them.
So it'll be there, it'll just be a little bit disjointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
Would that then take that southernmost building on phase one and would it, in effect, it's gonna be fronting on this connection?
it's gonna be backing on it.
Backing on it, yeah. This is where your balconies would be,
Well-
facing that drive.
As far as the, if it's, well, if you look at the other plan there, the orientation of the fronts of the building would be towards that circulation, east-west circulation drive. Could that be where these features that Dan pointed out would be more on the south elevation of that building as opposed to oriented to the north where this parking lot is?
I guess I didn't look fully at the floor plan, but, you know, the first floor is garage.
Well,
So you wouldn't have I mean, you'd still have to enter off of this for your garage.
well, no, what I'm saying is if that's the case, have the entry come off
Off of
from,
this.
from the south.
Yeah, that would be part
The
of,
difficult part there, because they're not required to build that for 2 more years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and they have an easement to be able to use that.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there, if we're looking at being consistent with what the code was trying to accomplish, we'd have to look a couple steps down the road and see
well,
where that
that's
might lead
why
to.
I'm so stuck on that phase two. That's gonna be,
That's the best opportunity to,
straighten it out.
yeah. And maybe because of the unique topography and elevation change in this property,
Yeah.
in the wetlands, maybe a reason to consider being more flexible with this layout.
Okay, Dan, where do you want us to go with this?
Well, I want you to clarify whether you're comfortable with the concept. And I think a really important part to build into that is that you accomplish some of the programming and open space and public square that.
With what you showed there, they've addressed some of that. On that,
And you just saw that today.
Yeah.
So, if you want more, we can discuss that here. We can bring it back in a couple of weeks once.
I'd like to see a more full plan. That's just what we do.
Can you bring that back up?
Yeah, can you, focus in on just that, the area where that picnic area is? There you
Well, I
go.
was thinking more of the focus in the back of
Oh.
the south building. There you, a little more. It says hydro-seeded irrigated lawn. Is there some way to put some features in there that architectural features, so when the road does go through, it looks like kind of looks like a front of a building as opposed to the rear of a building?
That's where the
Maybe we
decks
should
and the
think about
patios.
this for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Well, and it sounds like an important thing is how do you get this site connected both to the potential, hopefully likely future access drive, and to the east. So how do you?
Well, they have a
really
drive,
landscaping.
they do that on phase 2, I think.
definitely want this to happen.
This side.
Yeah, that's gonna continue to Cummings too.
Great.
But I think it's just the interconnection for those that wanna get to the bar.
You have to
I think we should
mitigate the,
think about
Yeah, they
this
certainly
for a
don't show
couple
what's
weeks.
on this side of the, you know, the wetland that they're gonna have to go through in the
Really
future.
useful takeaway would be if you're willing to entertain the concept that's been provided.
I guess I'm okay with the concept, but when you talk about this being the future connector road behind it, then maybe we need to dress up the back of the building so it looks more like, I like
I do
this
like the
side,
concept.
but I'm not sure I like this facing that connector road, so. Without some type of treatment on it, I don't know, we just saw this half hour ago.
Yep, understood. I guess the thing I'd point out there is with this layout, we're not, that southern building isn't hugging the south property line, and there is significant grade challenges there. So I haven't seen, I don't know that, I think Warren Brugink was doing the engineering of the other parcel. I don't know if they've even designed that road and elevation wise, but that would be, I guess, one concern that I would have on
This thing drops like 8
tying
feet,
that together.
And they're taking care, this is a flat building, I thought, how are they doing that? Well, they're taking care of
Well, I guess
all the
that's-
back side yards.
maybe
So this whole thing is gonna start.
there has to be a
You can see
discussion
this, the
between
contours.
Warren
This is
Brugink
quite
and
a-
you and,
The difficulty, like Scott said, is a timing thing, because
Oh, I
we're
know.
ready to go now and they're
Use the land.
years away yet.
This is gonna present a problem.
But
I know.
I understand the issue.
We talked about some synergies with the water main there too.
Correct,
And
and
it would be great if they knew it was gonna be there and they could tap into it, it'd be cheaper, easier. They just don't know. So what they've got proposed is to go out to the street,
They could
which is
break
not as
some of this up
desirable.
with different paneling
But that's
like they
all they
do
have to
up
work
front,
off
too.
today.
Do some
The reality is that what if they don't put that road in?
what would that, I thought we decided.
We've decided they have
That
to.
is going
It
in.
has to in 2
Yeah.
years?
By
What if,
2000 something,
21? 21?
what if all of a sudden you get some sort of economy drop and then the developer comes back and says, we're not selling the units,
That's true. I
we
mean,
can't,
another,
we can't put ourselves in a position where we want to put the road in. Now all of a sudden we've turned around and said, okay, you need to change the whole entire rear on something that somebody else
Speculation.
has to do.
I'm not suggesting we flip the building all around, it's just so it doesn't look like the back of a building.
Or if they can't get the environmental clearances they need for that road.
There's another factor.
You got patios out the back, is there a way to dress those up and make them a little more
Yeah,
fancy?
you have
I think
some
that the
different
biggest
pro-
thing there, in my opinion, is the landscaping, and if you look at the plan that Designscapes did, they do have, significant landscaping there. The reality of it, again, is these aren't buildings that we're leasing. So, I mean, RJM wants to make these extremely attractive so that buyers actually want to invest their money and buy it and live there. So we want it to look nicer, quite frankly, than what the city does, because we want to sell the units.
And I think just like you have on the front, you've got a couple different vertical, horizontal type sidings. You could do the same thing in the back
Yeah,
for
that-
a portion of it, just.
Something, I'm not
something
looking for
simple.
expensive, just something
Understood.
that dresses it up a little.
so pulling this back together, we can sit here all night and chew on it. What do you want from us now, Dan? I think we'd like to see a more fuller, a more complete set of,
Well, I don't,
I want to know what standards are going to be more important to hone in on and whether the concept as shown is something we can work with. And I think what I'm hearing is, yes, the concept is something we can work with. One thing that's really important to go along with that is how does that concept connect to a future grid for the access out to the other site and connectivity to that other site and connectivity to a potential future road and to the frontage on Cummings. So how does this layout connect to more of a public square off-site?
well, they've addressed some of the open areas. I mean, that's a good thing. You're not gonna get the 12-foot first floor.
You can wrap the publicness of that phase two around the corner too. That might be a way to tie that together, It'd be hard to tie the open spaces together exactly, but, that building is gonna be such that you should be comfortable walking around the south side of it too. It's just that when you get into this residential, it may not have as much of a comfortable feel like for a sidewalk like Tom was mentioning. But you could stop it at the access point where the easement would be to get them to the new road. I use the word road loosely. It may not be a road.
Is everybody
it may just be a
comfortable
private
with the
drive.
concept? To say, if you're not comfortable, speak up now.
Uncomfortable.
So, I don't know what we make a motion on, is what I'm saying.
I think
Well,
we-
so what I was saying is I'm only comfortable with a motion on phase one.
Yeah.
Nothing with phase two. And then I had provided some suggestions as to phase two. One, it needs to meet much stricter in terms of DDA. Two, I like the cross-access agreement. Three, it sounds like what the board is saying is pay some extra attention to a potential road that will go on the south side of that building. Did I say the cross-access? The only other thing I was thinking is I would like to be a little bit specific on the mailbox being on that southern part of the, what I'll call that green belt. right there. But other than that, I was quite comfortable with it as to what it shows.
Maybe add just a little more architectural feature on the backside that'll become kind of a major thoroughfare.
Yeah, I understand that. I just get a little bit nervous throwing that on them, not knowing or wondering. And I don't feel like it's that bad the way it sits today. I mean, your background, if they were to change just even the color, so add a color band.
Yeah, that's what I was, don't know in and outs, ups and downs, just maybe some material change or something.
Visually, it would change entirely how it looks, so.
Well, the front has a little bit of brick on that first floor. You could do a little brick back there, dress it up a little bit, little vertical siding accent here and there.
Yeah, but are we
You know,
comfortable
that's-
approving something tonight without seeing it?
See, I disagree with Tom on that. I think that's kind of a lipstick kind of thing that you're just asking them to throw on, and they still have to meet a performa. And, coming from a development side of things, to throw that on the back side of it, yeah.
But it's gonna be the front side eventually.
Maybe.
Well, we can say maybe about everything that,
And I guess what happened from, play referee a little bit, maybe it can be an opportunity for the creativity of the developer to show how that part of the building or that part of the site relates to the outside.
Yeah, the only downside to that is that
Sidewalk.
who's then going to look at it? Because it won't come back in front of this board. So we either have to be comfortable with the way it shows tonight,
That's
or
kind of
we're
the point.
not.
And that's where we meet in another couple of weeks. I think if there's some details that can be produced in that time, you could feel comfortable tabling and looking at it as soon as 2 weeks from now.
Well, is this even a case, even a actionable case? Do we have complete plans?
Well, you have what I have, 7
Yeah,
points
they
of
do.
the standout code that are not addressed. And 2 of those points that are really big are how is the open space, what is the detail of the open space? And that's what you're still talking about to some degree. To some degree, you're still talking about the architectural detail that feeds this as a complete plan. But there's the unaddressed open space detail, at least to the extent you need to react to what you're shown tonight, have time to kind of digest it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's something that I think warrants acting on it at the next meeting.
So then, go ahead.
I guess I'd also suggest if it's gonna come back in a couple weeks is maybe take a zoom out and see how this might fit in with some type of a grid system, grid work. Because this is an initial first step of, in effect, that plan. And let's be careful about how this might fit in with whatever is gonna help happen along that corridor. And maybe it'll work out fine, but it just
to
getting
see
that,
it.
yeah, zooming back out a little bit might give us a better perspective on that.
You were gonna say something, Steve?
No, I think I'm good.
Oh.
You understand what we're looking for?
Yeah, I do.
Just ask, the only thing I was gonna say is you'd asked if you had a complete set of plans, and I've done enough in Walker and elsewhere that you do have a complete set of plans with one exception. The landscape plan that's on the TV you just got today. But other than that, you've got all the engineering, all the details, all the architectural, more than what I normally give planning commissions, but I totally understand the concern.
So,
Does it sound like this more, we kind of want to table this and then get a little bit more?
yeah, we don't want to delay them much. I'd like to see them come back as soon as possible.
I think when they come back, it'll be a pretty easy review once we've seen everything, had a chance to look it over.
So then let's give them where we sit on each one of the DDA items so that they're not trying to pull their hair on one that we would naturally push through.
Can you bring that up so we can see the list?
Yeah, let's bring up that one slide with the list.
Well, for me, everything but the open space was I felt pretty all right with. I mean,
Yeah, me too.
one person's perspective, but it seemed like based on the layout of the site and frankly, the type of development it is, looking contextually at where we're at, I didn't have a problem with what I was looking at with the exception of trying to add some open space
Yeah,
to
and
the
they
site.
address the open space.
Which is addressed, so.
They're not gonna get the 12-foot. I don't think the U-shaped building fits on there very well.
Yeah, the main entrance facing the front can't happen.
So that means you're discarding any alternate concept, and that is, that's a fine choice to make, so that's discarded. Probably front porch, what do you feel about the front porch?
I think that gets back to the brownstone kind of thought, which isn't really what we're, I guess, leaning towards as overall architecture anyway.
15% approved materials,
What's the front?
They were at 12, Dan?
The front porch is a garage door. The front porch is a
Well,
garage door.
and that makes sense, where you got a garage door next to a entry door, you can't have 3 feet.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense, but can we do a fake front porch at the patio in the back? I don't know, I'm not comfortable with the back looking like a back, but I may be in the minority.
No, Tom, I'm inclined to, as far as if we're jumping outside of what we're looking at here necessarily, the rear aesthetic facing the hypothetical road at this point, I think as far as from where I sit, we should plan as that road is going to exist because that's a condition that we put on another developer and we need to, plan accordingly. Now, I don't think it needs major changes, but maybe some breakups to the look of it, you know, because it's just sort of long and monolithic in the 2 strips of it, so.
From a color standpoint.
Right.
I'd probably agree with that a little bit.
Well, even some vertical siding with a horizontal, because right now it's all,
Yeah, it's
Well,
one
even,
long-
even if you could just get a couple vertical lines and maybe a little color
they
to
can be
break things up.
creative.
we'll
They'll
work on that.
dazzle us with brilliance.
I'm
We're,
not-
we're
I'm
getting
not a
into, we're
designer.
getting
You
into
don't want me to do
details
it.
that are, more to you guys, but.
Dan, on the 15% approved front facade, you're talking about glass.
Glass, yeah.
Windows and front doors.
Yeah.
And they're at
But not over-
11.7.
But not garage doors.
Correct.
So they're close, so,
Windows and
Can't you
garage
make the
doors
windows a
wouldn't
little bit
count.
bigger?
no, garage doors.
How
Man
about
doors.
Windows within the garage door, would that count?
Help. How about windows in the overhead doors? I like that idea.
I think we're getting a little nitpicky here.
We actually do have a discrepancy in your color rendering as opposed to the black and whites. You'll notice at the front entry on the renderings, there is a full light beside that, which would get us over that percentage.
Okay.
As opposed to the black and whites, we eliminated that. Those have to be tempered. They're quite expensive, but if that's something we would have to add back in.
I like
That
that,
percent.
I would
I
like to
like
see-
that look there a lot better than I do the one with just a door with a little slit window.
Yeah.
That dresses it up to me. Not enough to make me wanna buy one, but. Sorry, not interested. My next place is the nursing home. Assisted living, maybe?
So we have items that we're willing to discard, items that we think can be addressed or should be addressed, and I think that maybe for some discussion. Based on how it goes on the project side, the front porch and the 3-foot rise, I think we said, comfortable discarding that if we're accepting that the garages have an integral part of these units. Possible to do, is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Open space and open space programming, I think those are, what I heard you say, like, direction that's going and to have more of a chance to review the details.
Yeah.
So that gives a little bit of a better idea.
I mean,
You want a condition-
I don't think the 15% approved front facade is a deal breaker here.
No, but they can do
If you can do,
glass next door to,
Yeah,
or
well,
whatever they
like,
call that.
like the developer said, he's got it with the newer
yeah.
doors as selected, so.
Okay. I think- Do we have to table this?
Yes, I would make a motion to table it.
Motion by Tom, is there support?
Support.
Support by Steve, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved? Opposed? Approved. Opposed?
I'm not gonna oppose that.
Hurry back.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd like to see this go.
We're excited about the project.
So you're probably
And wait for phase two, Steve.
Gonna tighten up your wheels there?
Pushing that through, but I understand why people want it.
Tyler,
So, from that standpoint, it's fine.
that's okay. He's
Well, now we lost
the one that
Dan.
wanted the interruption, so.
We don't even, just kidding.
Can you figure out what's going on in Talmadge over there?
We should, I haven't found out either.
You need to go by there then.
I don't go north,
You don't?
not
How do you
north or
don't
west,
even know about it?
from you guys.
I saw it too, and it's like, what is that? Looks
Okay,
like-
Dan, next meeting.
Next meeting, we have a project at 349 Cummings that we're gonna be looking at. It's a 2 townhome building development. So-
That's Tim, that's Tim?
That's it?
No, I'm talking about this.
Well, I get in the mix.
We'll work on resubmittal timing, and I don't wanna box, Scott and I have to be able to react to things and write our report, so we'll wanna get some pretty quick coordination and turnaround from them, so we can do that reasonably.
Well,
The
we've never
good news is-
taken submittals on the night of the meeting as,
Oh, yes, you have.
no, we don't.
Maybe 25 or 30 times that I can remember.
Okay, we don't like to take submittals.
Dark hour of YouTube starting, if anybody's still watching the YouTube channel, and the drama starts now. Otherwise, we have pretty small
Sometimes
items.
that's what I get for drawings, and they say, can you bid it right now?
Yeah, I think there's some good stuff on that landscape plan, we just flesh it out. We have 2 schools that have some additions. Central Elementary School is doing kind of a phase 2 addition. It's 3 small additions on kind of the corners of their building, so I'll just give an update on that. The West Michigan Academy of Environmental Science at Wilson and Leonard, they're adding a roughly 9,000 square foot early childhood education center. So in the scheme of that overall site, it doesn't look like that much, but the impact to traffic at that already traffic
is
intensive
huge
intersection
there.
is something we're looking at
We
closely.
should put a curb cut right on Wilson there, so they can get right out on Wilson.
They have a crossing guard on Wilson. That person's gonna get flattened one of these days.
We are asking for good traffic data, and hopefully we get that tomorrow or Friday. Other than the schools, we have some requests for extensions of past approvals. So to go on the Wayback Machine, we have a hotel on Center Drive that has a 2-year expiration window, and they're finally getting their plans in. And ask for an extension on that. The Boy Scouts are also gearing up for their plans for their campus, and they're asking for an extension for that.
It's Scouts,
Excuse me, the Scouts.
the Scouts.
And then the Michigan State Police is looking for a little bit more height on their, what they call the mechanical penthouse. So those are some kind of odds and ends items. I think we won't be too overloaded with the kind of stuff we're gonna see. I think the West Michigan Academy and this project will probably be the bulk of that agenda. Early November, I had a minor freak out talking to Scott about it at the beginning of this meeting. We just got 4 submittals today, but that may dilute itself. We'll see what. Holy smokes.
Back to the poor boys. The second house from the poor boys has got a porta-john in the driveway. It's been there for a couple of weeks. What's that all about? You seen that?
Somebody uses it to go to the bathroom.
Well, I understand that, but I thought they were in Grand Rapids, but according to tonight, that's in Walker, and their house has got a porta-john in the front yard. Okay, moving on.
Right now it does.
It did tonight. It's been there a couple of Sundays on the way to church. I'm just curious.
Dan, is that West Michigan Environmental Academy, is that a courtesy review, or is that a full-fledged review?
Well, it's a public charter school. So what I've been told, and I should double check, but it's left to the same standards that we apply to
State of
public
Michigan.
schools. So that means that it's a courtesy review for your intents purposes. They have different parking requirements.
But it impacts us through stormwater and traffic pretty significantly.
But how do you restrict? It's the big question, how do you restrict somebody just because there's a traffic problem? Because
Can't.
MDOT doesn't do anything.
Well, yeah, they have. They've restricted that driveway to the north. That was big controversy, wasn't it?
Well, and they've cheated like crazy on that. The driveway was supposed to be for deliveries to the cafeteria only. And now you see as many cars as you could fit parked in there. They're parked in the grass in there. Those cars were never supposed to be going in and out during the day. So if we pulled them into this, that could turn into be, some kind of a problem. I think what we focused in on was, you already had a significant negative impact from a traffic standpoint on this intersection, which is an intersection that we've had some very serious accidents at, and some other concerns about kids crossing the street. Now you wanna add 6 classrooms. So bring us back up to speed on how this traffic's supposed to work on the site.
Part of what we asked for was a circulation plan showing the routes of pickup, drop-off, where teachers park, how the rapid moves through the site, and what agreements are tied into the rapid using the site and some of the adjacent properties. Because at different points in the past, they've routed, I think along the offices on the south side of Leonard. So it's gonna be important to see how the bus system works. And I've taken the bus here. I know I've shared the bus ride with some kids going to the academy, so I know it's used. So that's an important part of the puzzle too, is how that rapid fits into the circle.
Yeah, and they don't bus, so you got way more cars than a normal
yeah.
school.
What dictates whether or not it's a courtesy review? I've built several charter academies, and every one I've had to go to a planning commission for.
Well, if it's a public school, the state superintendent reviews the site plans. That's my understanding of it. So we noticed this as a courtesy site plan review, but we still noticed it the same way we do a full-fledged site plan review. Worth looking into again, but I think the last round of additions, WME, whatever the acronym is, I don't think they came for a full site plan review in 2013 or 2012, unless I'm mistaken on that. When they came in for the last round of improvements.
National Heritage Academies is owned privately, so they have to come before a planning commission.
That's different. They don't own this school though, I don't think.
Yeah, there's private
Right,
charter.
I'm just saying there's different levels of the charter.
And Covenant Christian is a private school. They had to go through what was considered full-fledged site plan review process, and that was a pretty small review because it was a small addition, but it's reviewed a little bit differently.
Well,
Yeah, it wasn't National Heritage, but it was their parent company.
Yeah, I think Grand Valley
High school's for it.
initially was the charter behind it years ago, when it first started. I don't know if that got switched over, but Grand Valley was the underwriter.
for National Heritage?
No, for West Michigan.
West
That sounds
Michigan?
familiar.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That does sound familiar.
Yeah, my son went there as a kindergartner when it first started. It was all these hippie-type parents, and we were included, and saying this is the best thing for our kids, and next thing you know,
Fit right in, huh?
then it all of a sudden became like an alternative school. I mean, it's changed considerably from its initial concept.
My
we'll
kids
say.
went to Walker Charter, all of them, and it worked out very well for us.
Yeah, but I meant this in environmental sciences. So very hands-on parents that
Okay,
were disillusioned.
anything else, Dan? No. Thanks a lot for your work tonight, guys. That was some heavy lifting. And it's good to see Weller move through, so.
Good job, everybody.
Well, Tom's gonna be egging my house tonight.
I could.
I thought they were gonna mess it up.